The battlefield was currently divided into many different sections. This was mainly because the sheer number of participants made it impossible to have a single chaotic battle. There were multiple battlegrounds where the situation vastly differed. Not all of these battlegrounds were wars between four forces. The Cloud Plain originally didn't bring too many troops to maintain covertness, and Shadow Garden was made up of traders from other organizations, so their numbers also weren't large. At most, these two allied forces only took part in 3 or 4 different battlefields. Of these, the most prominent were the location nearest to Damien where Rose, Rue, and Xianxia were fighting, and a location relatively further away where Long Chen's blood cavalry held the momentum. In these two areas, the allied forces were achieving complete victory over their enemies. However, they still had to deal with the difference in numbers. Not to mention the thousands of fourth-class beings in the sky that constantly pressured them. Without these obstacles removed, it would be difficult to achieve a true victory. As for the other battlefields, the remaining 2 where the Cloud Plain and Shadow Garden's troops fought were relatively equal, and with Avalon's help, they were able to persist. The rest of the sections were merely wars between Asgard and Niflheim alone. After all, these two forces were never allies. They merely acted for mutual benefit. As Damien looked over this situation, he developed a rough understanding of what to do. And since Tianyang was actively filling him in on what took place during his baptism, he was able to grasp the situation. It looks like the first test will be wide-range killing power. His first goal was to remove the numbers advantage that the enemies currently had. He didn't believe that, with his current achievements, it'd be impossible. Despite the fact that he already felt power coursing through his veins, he had a sneaking suspicion that even he couldn't feel the true extent of evolution his body had gone through. This was something for him to slowly realize as time passed. But for now, Damien's arm pointed outward, aiming into the horizon. His fingers were spread apart, in the next instant, clenching into a fist. Collapse. The pitch-black mana in his body moved, slowly depleting. But there were no outside phenomena to accompany this movement. As if doing so of its own will, space on the horizon collapsed. Boom! A massive explosion rang out. Thousands of kilometers worth of space shattered and fell to the floor like glass. All those enemy soldiers within that space were sucked into the void, ripped to shreds by the rampantly swirling spatial mana within the chaotic space. In that instant, tens of thousands died. But this was nowhere near enough. Even Damien was frowning. I should be able to do more than that. Is the new property of my mana inhibiting me? It made sense, considering that he barely comprehended the void at all, but he still didn't enjoy coming to know that he was being suppressed. Without hesitation, he continued his assault. Condense, multiply, and snare. His mana continued to deplete rapidly, but with his current reserves, that wasn't a problem at all. While Collapse was a wide-scale attack that indiscriminately killed anyone within its targeted area, his current method was different. This was the dimensional magic he learned within the world energy barrier. Just as he had once experienced, space condensed into small boxes, enough to contain hundreds of people within. These boxes were plentiful, trapping over 100,000 soldiers. After they formed, these soldiers were completely isolated from the outside world. From their perspective, they were suddenly thrown into an abyss without light or sound. Accelerate. It was an even less showy command than his last. Only those within the dimensional cages understood just how terrifying that one word could be. The essence of time that was missing from those cages flooded in without mercy, rapidly revolving and creating a force field of accelerated time. These soldiers were only third classes who hadn't even touched upon laws yet. How could they resist? Damien was currently putting on a show of power. As such, he made sure that what was happening inside the dimensional cages was clear for all to see. Those who watched on were forced to witness how in a mere instant, those poor soldiers aged and wrinkled, their life force fading rapidly. By the time a full second passed, many of their bodies had already scattered to ashes with not even bones left behind. How refreshing, Damien thought to himself. This wasn't the feeling of battle he craved, but this scene where numbers were meaningless against his strength made it easy to get conceited. If he didn't realize the depths of his arrogance beforehand, perhaps he would have become drunk on this feeling. There are too many of them for me to take care of it all myself. I've wiped out those on Rose and Ryua's side, so they should finish up soon. After that, they can help Long Chun and continue on from there. As for me, the previous scene had happened too fast for many to comprehend. Now that a few seconds had passed, the fourth classes in the surroundings were rushing towards him like an angry mob, not a single one sparing a glance at their other enemies. Damien grinned savagely. Xianxia, come help me out with the small fries. Li Xiu, Zhang Hualing, Hebe, don't think I don't feel your presences. Come get some kills as well. Just leave the stronger ones for me to deal with. Ho ho ho, now that you've reached our level, it seems you have no consideration for us anymore. Can't you ask a little nicer? A mental transmission entered his ears. This was naturally from Zhang Hualing. Damien shook his head wryly. Come on, I'm offering you a free meal. Aren't you the one being rude by not accepting? Zhang Hualing smiled mysteriously. Really, she wasn't wrong about this kid when they first met. Even when he was still at third class, he would have easily been able to obtain the Golden Dragon position. Without another word, her figure flashed out of the crowd, arriving beside Damien. Xianxia arrived at the same time. While Hebe lurked in the surroundings waiting for his time to strike, Li Xiu actually ignored his words completely. Seeing her actions, Damien's smile turned even wryer. Looks like Long Chun got him another one. Really, that brat has some charisma. Regardless, it was fine. He only wanted to give some free experience to those he knew. If they didn't want to accept, that was on them. Ah, right? It had been so long that he almost forgot. 5 more figures appeared around him from thin air. These were naturally the helpers he gained from the 3000 Beast Mountain range. If he was going to eat, he'd make sure everyone around him could eat too. Another one? Elvira muttered. The Fire Phoenix matriarch hummed. You always seem to be involved in some kind of chaos, Lucius commented. Ha ha ha. This is why I like you, kid. The White Dragon King roared with laughter. As for the Ice Phoenix matriarch, she quietly took in the surrounding scene. Damien smiled. With their company and mix of personalities, things would never be boring. Now, facing off against a horde of thousands of fourth-class beings, a team of 9 had assembled. To say it was going to be a fun battle would be an understatement. There was no need to fill the 5 clan leaders in on the situation. If Damien called them out, it meant it was time to fight. Although this time, it seemed the fight would be far fiercer. Brat? You broke through? The White Dragon King finally noticed. The aura coming from Damien was so faint that he almost brushed over it. Damien nodded lightly. But we can talk about that later. For now, we fight. There were too many enemies coming at them already. While mental transmissions only took an instant to exchange, Damien was itching to rush ahead. The White Dragon King could easily feel the blazing inferno of fighting spirit coming from his body, so he let the matter rest as well. After all, the thought of his junior catching up to him wasn't pleasant. His fighting spirit inadvertently erupted at the thought. Without hesitation, Damien and his team charged at the incoming horde. Even Damien wasn't foolish enough to believe he could easily fight against thousands of fourth classes when he just ascended, but currently, his greatest advantage was surprise. Putting aside the fact that a freshly crowned fourth class wouldn't be used to their strength, they would have no law comprehension to speak of. Comparatively, these established fourth classes should be far stronger. But Damien was different. Not only did he already have some minor comprehension of spatial laws, but he could also utilize World Force and his new Void Mana to hold the advantage. He was far stronger than someone at the same level. In a situation where single combat was practically impossible, his first goal was to leave a major psychological impact on this horde. His feet stepped through the air like nothing, his body rapidly arriving in front of a man whose aura was far stronger than those around him. This man was named Sylvius, and he was a fourth class from Asgard. He wasn't particularly outstanding among all of Asgard's forces, but his power wasn't something to scoff at. He was roughly at Xianxia's level. When Damien arrived in front of him, he swung the double-edged sword in his hand without hesitation, pouring out torrents of mana as he did so. Lighting crackled and sundered the air around him, painting everything bright yellow. He had seen Damien's previous showing against the third classes. He was in no way going to underestimate this enemy. Damien grinned. Mirage appeared in his right hand and Hell appeared in his left. Pitch-black mana coiled around Mirage's blade, infusing it with space-time essence as he swung it to meet his opponent's blade. Lightning God Arts, Thunderous Impact, Void Sword Art First Form. Bladeless, a line was drawn through space wherever Mirage went. Its mere weight was enough to cause space to collapse. On the other hand, the lighting coiling around Sylvius's sword increased in quantity, raising his speed dozenfold until it far surpassed the sound barrier. Boom! The collision between these two forces was more than just a little heavy. Sylvius rapidly twisted his body to the side, evading the massive spatial tear that Bladeless created. When he looked over to see Damien doing the same, he found that his opponent actually hadn't moved at all. His lightning wasn't even an instant away from impacting Damien's body. Yet he didn't dodge? Damien grinned slyly at Sylvius' confusion. If I knew you were a lighting expert, I wouldn't have chosen you. His left arm raised, the black gun in his grip letting off undulations of power. From its barrel, a silverish-black bullet was fired. This was created from Damien's own lightning. Bang! Once again, a massive impact force rang out. Silver and yellow lighting intertwined and attempted to swallow each other. But despite Sylvius' lighting being composed of years of law comprehension, how could it contend with Damien, who had swallowed the heavens' lighting itself? The silver lighting rapidly devoured its opponent, its momentum constantly growing. When it finished its job, it continued forward, aiming for Sylvius himself. Sylvius gritted his teeth and raised his sword. This lighting was a higher-level existence than his, that was true, but he could feel that Damien's comprehension was lacking. While he possessed an advantage in raw power, Sylvius trumped him in skill. His sword slashed rapidly, creating a web of lightning scars in the space around him. As the silver lightning approached this web, it was caught within and forced to wrestle against Sylvius' substantial comprehension. At the same time, Sylvius glared at Damien, his arms thrusting out. Lightning God Art, Lightning Azura. A six-armed demonic phantom formed behind him, each arm holding a different lightning weapon. As Sylvius moved, the avatar moved with him. The top right arm that carried a massive lightning bolt and the middle left arm that held a domineering hammer moved together. One was fast and penetrative while the other was slow and blunt. When combined together, they created a nearly unavoidable offense. Damien's eyes hardened when he saw this. Right, even if their numbers made them seem like minor characters, these were all still fourth-class beings. 2 years ago, he wouldn't have even dreamed of fighting against someone at Sylvius' level. The lightning Azura wasn't a joke. Damien couldn't use his own lighting to counter it, and it was true that his lack of law comprehension was currently limiting him. He had no choice but to use something more substantial. Mirror Domain. Damien immediately summoned his domain, using the shattered space crystals it formed as a barrier against the lightning Azura. At the same time, its first strike arrived. Burst! Sylvius roared. The massive lightning bolt struck the spatial barrier, separating into countless smaller and more concentrated bolts and penetrating the defense. But the mirror domain was also a surprisingly strong ability. A large majority of these miniature lighting bolts were banished into the void or redirected to different locations. As for the rest, they shattered parts of the barrier as they fizzled out. But the lighting bolt was only an appetizer. The reason Sylvius burst it in the first place was to prepare for the second attack. The lightning hammer came down. Its impact directly shattered half of Damien's barrier. Yet this was only the beginning. Sylvius roared once again, causing the surrounding lightning mana to become active. Any trace of the shattered lighting bolt that remained in the mirror domain spontaneously combusted in a chain reaction. Whips of lighting connected them together, forming a large diagram. The lightning hammer finally broke through Damien's defense and impacted that diagram. As it did, it formed a resonant reaction with them, exponentially multiplying its force. The mirror domain was enveloped in a storm of lightning that even Damien couldn't dodge. In that instant, he activated his transformation skills, moving the blood runes on his scales into a defensive formation. Bang! The lightning struck true against Damien's body. Waves of shock traveled through his scales, a portion even penetrating through them and entering his body. KHH! Damien breathed. In this battle, he'd eaten the first loss. It wasn't a matter of arrogance, nor was it a matter of power. Damien surely had far more raw power than Sylvius. But his raw power couldn't show its true worth against the density of his opponent's law comprehension. This only went to show how important comprehension was in 4th class when compared to its predecessors. Still, Damien was unfazed. When it came to cards, he had more than just a few. He wouldn't go down with only this much. He circulated his mana rapidly, mimicking the way he controlled void essence in the past. As he did so, he found something strange. The lighting in his body was formed from mana and law comprehension. But as Damien's void mana came into contact with it, a strange thing occurred. Damien's eyes widened in shock and anticipation. His thoughts raced as he realized what was happening. Don't tell me, void mana has the power to suppress laws? It wasn't too clear at the moment since he'd only just ascended, but if his observation was true, he'd become an unstoppable powerhouse in the future. And when looking at the current fight, his chances of rapidly defeating his enemy had just increased exponentially. Sylvius moved to continue his attack immediately, not giving Damien any chance to regain himself. As soon as he saw Damien's body paralyzed from the rampant lightning energy within, he raised his arm and commanded the Lightning Azura to attack once more. Lightning Azura, Sky Cleaver. Just as the name implied, a massive saber cut through the air, cleaving the skies in two. But in that moment, Damien didn't move to retreat or even block the attack. He stood in front of the massive saber with no fear. This suppressive effect, how do I utilize it properly? He only just learned of its existence, so naturally, he didn't have any proficiency in wielding it. Of course, he could always project his mana to the outside world and use it in the crudest way possible, but he didn't want to do this. He wanted to understand the best use of his powers. For that, he would have to temper it in the most dangerous situations. Damien's mana flared, a pitch-black aura emerging from his body. Even feeling this aura was enough to cause one's scalp to tingle. The lightning saber reached Damien's body in an instant, bringing along a deafening crackle of thunder that almost bust his eardrums. In response, he recited Mirage. Clang. The difference in these two sword sizes was around 1,000 times, but Mirage still held true under the weighty suppression. It wasn't just a normal sword, it was a sword with budding intelligence and its own ability to utilize spatial laws. Against a lifeless law saber like this one, it was actually superior. It was only a matter of brute strength. As Damien held onto Mirage's hilt and pushed it to parry the lighting saber, he could hear the sound of the blade creaking. While it wouldn't be damaged, he was sure that it wasn't going to be able to handle the pressure alone for much longer. Now, his eyes flashed brilliantly. The flaring mana around his body condensed into his sword and concentrated at the point of impact. Coming into contact with this strange mana, the lighting saber's aura visibly dimmed, just enough to become manageable. Damien's muscles bulged as he used every ounce of his strength to slide the lightning saber against Mirage's blade, finally reaching the point where he completely skewed its direction. With the lighting saber out of the way, he pounced. In this fight, long-range combat wouldn't do him any good. Taking advantage of his physical strength and more esoteric abilities to kill his enemy by surprise was the best method to victory. His body arrived in front of Sylvius rapidly. Hell vanished from his left hand as it curled into a fist, rapidly propelling forward with the help of Damien's mana. Boom! The fist was like a meteor. When it crashed into Sylvius' body, he was sent flying back at untold speeds. On his face, his confusion was clearly represented. His opponent was only a newly ascended 4th class, wasn't he? What kind of power was this? But he wasn't even given the chance to ponder on it. Damien's figure flashed through space, exiting to Sylvius' side and throwing another fierce hook at his ribs. Bang! Crack! Sylvius rapidly moved his arms to parry, but his physical strength was nowhere near Damien's. Although his mortal body was strengthened during his baptism, he never focused on it, only ever improving his lightning. Against Damien's heavily evolved bodily strength, how could he stand a chance? His body was sent flying once again, but this time he'd truly taken damage. His right forearm was cracked, making his entire arm unusable until he took some medicines to fix it. In a fight where time was measured in seconds or even less, such an injury was truly dire. But there was more to it that he didn't yet realize. Every time Damien's fist impacted his body, he let a strand of void mana enter his enemy's body. This strand was tiny and untraceable, but if Damien was correct about his mana's qualities, it would be a deadly virus that soon showed its fangs. Until then, he only needed to continue wearing Sylvius down, chipping away at his defenses until he was nothing more than a pig on the chopping block. And that's exactly what he did. When Damien's attitude switched from testing his abilities to letting them fly wantonly, the momentum of the battle completely changed. Space fractured everywhere, turning into deadly blades that rushed at Sylvius from all directions. At the same time, Damien galvanized his mana and began utilizing the Void Sword art, blocking off any methods for his enemy's retreat. Under this barrage, Sylvius gritted his teeth and revolved his mana to dodge and block. Lightning flashed endlessly with his bodily movements, heightening his speed to a level that even Damien would be hard-pressed to contend with. He waded through the onslaught of space blades, his body dexterously avoiding the fissures created by Bladeless. Unexpectedly, he was actually able to escape the encirclement. But as he did so, he realized another problem. It wasn't just spatial fissures entrapping him in the current location. When his body neared an area some few hundred meters away, he found an invisible wall blocking his path. Damien grinned. Naturally, he would set up a dimensional cage to limit his enemy's movements. Now that he had the ability, why would he waste it? Accelerate his body became illusory, time around him slowing to a crawl. But in reality, Damien's personal time was being accelerated by the field around him. His body flashed into the spatial layers and waded through them. With space and time coming together to aid him, his movement speed surpassed even teleportation. When he arrived beside Sylvius, the latter hadn't even realized his presence. From that point-blank range, Mirage moved in a downward slash. Void Sword Art 5th Form, Dimensional Severance. The thin black line signifying the ability was drawn perfectly. It almost blended in with the surrounding space due to how pristine it was. Everywhere it went, light and space bent to its will, disallowing its path to be blocked by any force. Because the current dimensional severance wasn't the same empty shell that Damien had used back when he first created it in the trial world. With his current understanding of dimensional magic, he truly could sever the dimension in two. Dimensional severance was ethereal. While it moved as if it was existing in the real plane, the truth was completely different. It essentially formed a small self-contained dimension of its own, isolating it from the outside world while still allowing it to affect it. Therefore, even when Sylvius became aware of the attack, even when he pushed everything he had to block it or dodge it due to the terrifyingly cold aura he felt from it, he wasn't able to stop its path. To truly withstand dimensional severance, one needed the power to sunder the dimension itself. The black line passed through Sylvius' body so calmly that it almost looked like the two didn't intersect. Afterwards, it continued its path of destruction, even taking a chunk out of Damien's dimensional cage. Only then was one able to understand the true power of this attack. As for Sylvius, who was run through by it, his body split into two equal halves, the light fading from his eyes. He died just like that. Even after killing Sylvius, Damien didn't stop. His original goal was to psychologically attack the enemies with a show of strength, but his unfamiliarity with his own power disallowed this circumstance from becoming reality. Now that the battle had ended, he needed to accomplish that original purpose. And along with that, he needed to find better test dummies to help him understand his strength before he challenged people above his level. Damien's targets were now those on the weaker side of things, at similar levels to him. Against them, he wouldn't have to worry about the prospect of losing. He would be able to thoroughly understand at least how to utilize his void mana's suppression effect properly. In the previous battle, he'd tried using it to enhance his weapon and fists, and he'd tried to use it intrusively, but neither of these methods seemed viable. The former was simply wasting the ability's potential, while the latter took far too long to take effect. Even when Sylvius died, the void mana suppression only slightly inhibited him. It was likely he didn't even realize that his mana was being somewhat suppressed. When battles were timed by the second, an ability that took many minutes to activate wasn't viable at all. Therefore, he needed more testing. To use thousands of fourth-class beings as testing dummies, who could be so bold besides Damien? Nevertheless, he moved with a goal in mind and wouldn't stop until it was accomplished. Mirage flashed once more, hell appearing in his hand. One almost began to feel sorry for his enemies. When Damien killed Sylvius, it didn't cause as major of a shock on the battlefield as it would have in normal times. The situation was far too chaotic, making it hard for people to even notice this feat. However, his allies were plenty shocked by what they saw. They naturally didn't want to see Damien die early by overestimating himself, so they'd been splitting their attention to watch his battle from the beginning. Now that it was over, they could only marvel at his talent. A newly ascended fourth class killing someone in the middle of the same realm? Wasn't that too exaggerated? It had to be known, the difference between levels in fourth class was immense, and one's experience level alone didn't account for the entirety of their strength. At fourth class, the level on one's status came to represent how defined their existence was more than what their actual strength level was. True strength came from not only this but also law comprehension. This was why the denizens of the cloud plane termed this realm as law connection and law sea. A high level no longer meant strong strength. But in this case, Sylvius was surely a man who spent a great deal of time perfecting his lightning laws. If not, there was no way he'd be able to fend off Damien's silver heavenly lightning by relying on comprehension alone. For Damien to slay a character like this upon just ascending was mind-boggling. Perhaps even Xianxia would only be able to stand evenly matched to the current Damien. However, they didn't have much time to dwell on this topic. After affirming that Damien's life wouldn't be in danger, each of those 8 individuals returned to battle, putting their whole focus into defending and outlasting the horde in front of them. Really, to expect 9 people to fend off thousands of enemies with similar strength wasn't practical at all. The only reason they were able to continue moving with confidence was because they weren't alone in this battle. With Damien's previous aid, Rose and Ruyue were able to combine their efforts to slaughter the rest of the troops in their zone. Without fourth classes on their backs, it was far too easy. Afterward, they rushed into the adjacent zones, combining forces with those present to rapidly extinguish the enemy. Especially when the bloody cavalry met with Rose and Ryua's troops, they formed an unstoppable force. And with these third classes gaining the upper hand, the remaining allied fourth-class beings no longer had to stay reserved. Hundreds of allies rushed towards Damien's battle, ready to provide aid. Fourth-class beings spread so far that they blotted out the sky. With these newly arrived helpers, it was far easier for the previous 8 individuals to retain their strength while they fought. In a battle of attrition against a large number of enemies, wasting mana was a deadly mistake. The only exception to this rule was Damien himself. When he first began his onslaught, it had taken him more than just a few minutes to kill a being at the same level as him. However, things were different now. With every enemy he killed, his speed rapidly increased. The void mana flaring around his body became more dignified, signifying Damien's increased control over it. In fact, this mana was slowly spreading into the distance rather than being congregated around Damien's body. During his most recent battle, he'd accidentally stumbled upon a viable method to utilize this ability. The mirror domain spread into the horizon, shattering space into small crystalline shards that danced through the air like spirits. Any concept of distance and direction was thrown into disarray, even time becoming muddled in certain areas. Under this atmosphere, a normal practitioner wouldn't even be able to stand up straight, but these fourth classes were different. Damien's domain was powerful in its own right, but it shared the same overarching problem as every other ability he had. It wasn't supported by laws. Due to this, even though they were still suppressed, even the weakest of fourth classes were able to put up some resistance against it. When Damien realized this, he spread his void mana and incorporated it into his domain. If he couldn't match their laws, he indiscriminately suppressed theirs until they matched his level. His current opponent, a young woman who looked around 20, was facing this very suppression. The ice laws she spent so much time arduously cultivating for the past 50 years since her ascension were suppressed near the level they were at when she first started sending them. This feeling was like losing something incredibly precious, putting a mental burden on her that only made her bad situation exponentially worse. Please, spare me," she stammered. Her eyes were big and watery, giving off an exceedingly innocent feeling. While her looks weren't anything heaven-defying, she was beautiful in her own right. Especially with her current expression, she made one feel the inexplicable desire of wanting to protect. But facing this woman's charms, Damien was unmoved. More than that, he was disgusted. Ever since his ascension, he'd been marveling at the greatness of fourth class in comparison to its predecessors. In some sense, he'd put this power level on a pedestal and subconsciously expected those who reached it to display behavior fitting for their positions. Sylvius was a good example of this. He ardently trained for who knows how long, and even though he ended up dead at Damien's hands, he never showed a sign of weakness even in his last moment. It wasn't even just him. Most of Asgard's troops were the same. It was people like this woman, those who submitted to Niflheim, that gave in to fear and cowardice. Even if they were true fourth-class beings, even the 11th elder of the Xue clan was better than them in Damien's eyes. His sword moved without mercy, the woman's head flying into the air soon after. Watching the fountain of blood that sprayed out from her neck, Damien scoffed. "It's good to know that I won't have to kill humanity's future in my crusade against the Nox. The type of people that willingly submit to their oppression aren't even worth a second of my time." His gaze moved away, focusing on the larger battlefield. The suppression force of his domain was the most practical utilization of void mana he could sustain at his current level. If so, there was no need for him to continue wasting time on small fries and cowards. His body moved, heading to a more central area. Now that he had the method, it was time to flex it in front of some worthy opponents. While Damien's tirade went largely unnoticed in the already chaotic battlefield before he rushed into the center area, there was a particular group of beings who witnessed every second of it. These beings had been specifically paying attention to him the entire time, after all. Wrath's eyes were clouded with a myriad of emotions. While his greed and obsession fought to take over his rational mind, he was keenly aware that Tianyang's presence disallowed him from moving at all. Without blocking him in some way, Wrath would be indefinitely tied down. But Wrath wasn't someone who could contain his emotions and control them. As a Nox, this was never the path they were meant to take. From birth, they were mindless. They followed their instincts to kill and plunder with no other thoughts in mind at all. For them to gain spiritual intelligence upon entering fourth class was a miracle in itself, but it was a change far too abrupt for them to completely suppress the desires that controlled them for so long. For this reason, many fourth-class Nox were belligerent to the core, acting domineering and without care for consequences regardless of the intelligence they possessed. Among them, Wrath could be called an outlier. He always valued his rational mind. He valued the memories he possessed that allowed him to maintain tact and cautiousness. It was only for this reason why he was able to perfectly conceal the seed's existence and take up his post in Niflheim without worrying about others coming to rob him of his treasure. That was something he'd never allow. But even someone like Wrath, who spent a little over 10,000 years laying in wait within the human domain until the seed's prophesied appearance, carefully planning his every step, couldn't hold down his urges with his goal right in front of him. In his mind, the scene of him seizing Damien and devouring him repeated a million different ways. In each one, Wrath became an unrivaled powerhouse that led the Nox and even consumed the universe itself. With this kind of delusion fueling him, how could he retain control? The last semblance of sanity in his mind disappeared. His vision turned red and his mind focused on the singular urge to consume the seed. Wrath's body emitted a series of popping noises. Tianyang immediately sensed this, flashing away and appearing mere feet in front of Wrath. "Don't make any decisions you'll regret," he stated coldly. In reality, his power level was just about equal to Wrath's. It was because of his deep understanding of spatial laws that he appeared so mysterious under the probing of others. If he truly wanted to hold Wrath back, it wouldn't be a simple matter at all. And if he wanted to do so while protecting this planet from destruction, it'd be near impossible. But Wrath didn't even hear Tianyang's warning. His mind was focused wholly on Damien's figure and the pitch-black mana emanating from it. The popping sounds emitted from his body grew until each one was like a thunderclap. Wrath's body expanded to double its size, multiple appendages bursting forth from his body in fireworks of blood. His form was actually similar to Sylvius Lightning Azura, except his body was covered in the stench of blood and the aura of slaughter. He was a true Azura. Roar! Wrath let out a furious bellow. Space distorted into bloody vortexes around him. In the next instant, his figure blurred and shot out. Fuck! Tianyang gritted his teeth and cursed. He maneuvered through space, but even then he could only match Wrath's speed. Raising his hand, he immediately forced the surrounding thousands of kilometers to compress and lock, slowing Wrath's movements. But Wrath was prepared for this. Even with his mind taken over by his instinct, he was a bred killer. Battle awareness was his natural talent. One of the 6 gargantuan arms jutting out of his back moved, a bloody bell appearing in its grasp. Dong! The bell rang violently, shaking even space at its very foundation. As these frequencies bounced around within Tianyang's spatial cage and amplified each other, space shattered entirely. The level of connection Tianyang had with space surpassed Damien's purely because of the difference in comprehension. When space influenced by Tianyang shattered, it led to a void that could kill even a demigod if they stayed for too long. But Wrath didn't seem to register this fact. Within the shattered void, his figure was a blood-red meteor. A layer of energy protected him from the chaotic forces outside, allowing him to smoothly pass through. Tianyang was frustrated, sure, but he didn't think this result was unnatural. Wrath was equal to him, so attempting to stop him from fleeing at full power wasn't within Tianyang's capabilities. But slowing him down enough to where he could catch up and initiate battle was more than just possible. As long as he could impose his authority from nearby, he'd delay Wrath greatly. Che! Tianyang let out a battle cry, his figure fusing into space. Although his true body didn't move, it was like space itself became his body. The spatial layers condensed, turning into a massive hand that pressed down on the shattered void and attempted to grab Wrath. In that moment, Wrath didn't hold anything back. He didn't need any strength to kill Damien, so he could use his mana wantonly before reaching his target. The bloody light around him flared into action, creating a massive inferno. This inferno then condensed into a terrifyingly massive red sword that shot up into the hand, planning to face it head-on. Boom! The shattered void that was still in the process of healing was blown apart once again. The collision of these two forces sent out fierce shockwaves that would have spread for thousands or even tens of thousands of kilometers if Tianyang didn't contain them. But this was the worst possible situation. Borrowing the momentum of the shockwave, Wrath rapidly increased his speed. With a demigod's full-powered momentum, he'd already reached the 4th-class battlefield in the time it took for these two collisions to occur. To put it simply, it was instantaneous. Tianyang cursed in his heart. If he wasn't able to protect his disciple, what kind of master would he be? He threw away any hesitation he might have had before and steeled himself. Boom! His divinity-laced mana rapidly expanded. Within his body, his blood burned away, empowering it. Tianyang took the riskiest move a cultivator could make. He sacrificed his own blood vitality. Blood vitality was the source of life force. If one burned it, while they could rapidly increase their power for a short period of time, they'd be left severely wounded for a very long time unless they ingested a great deal of heavenly materials. For Tianyang to sacrifice his only went to show how much he valued his disciples. Break for me! His hands clenched into fists and punched out. At his command, the void shattered into countless fragments that rained down on Wrath's position. While this was a move Tianyang could replicate without sacrificing his blood vitality, its power wasn't nearly as great. In a fraction of an instant, mere milliseconds at most, Tianyang's attack reached Wrath. The spatial shards ran through his body, tearing him into multiple pieces. But even then, Wrath didn't stop his charge. He knew from the start that he wouldn't be able to block this attack. The injuries he received were grievous, and he would be incapacitated at the very least if he allowed them to fester. He placed all his bets on the single circumstance where he was able to consume Damien. If he succeeded, he'd not only recover but become extremely powerful as well. If he failed, he'd die pathetically without accomplishing anything. Wrath's adamance was far past the level of insanity. No matter how Tianyang attacked him, he allowed these attacks to land and used their impact force to propel himself forward. His fierce blood vitality dwindled with every passing instant, but he didn't care anymore, because, in that final moment, his body appeared where he desired it to be. His arm whipped out faster than lightning, his grip attempting to wrap around Damien's neck. It all happened in an instant. Wrath's hand wrapped around Damien's neck, immediately exerting immense pressure to crush it. At the same time, Tianyang arrived next to him, spreading his authority and using everything he had to force Wrath's movements to a halt. Like this, a stalemate developed. Damien became a hostage who would be killed the second Tianyang let his guard down. Cook! He coughed out the blood that had gathered in his throat as his bewilderment grew with every passing moment. It took a few seconds for him to realize his own predicament. While his heart began to panic, he forced a strand of mana into his brain to calm his reaction. If he moved too rapidly, Wrath's razor-sharp fingernails would dig into his neck and rip his head off. He really had no leeway. It took everything in his power to remain calm in this situation. But as he saw how hard Tianyang was working to keep him alive, he was able to calm himself far faster. This wasn't something he had any say in. This was a standoff between demigods where he was unfortunate enough to be caught in the middle. Let him go, Tianyang uttered coldly, enunciating every syllable. His rage was clearly represented in the billowing killing intent coming from his body. Damien could feel small pocket spaces opening between his neck and Wrath's claw, giving him some space to breathe. If it was any other time, Damien would have marveled at Tianyang's precision control. But now, he could only be thankful for the breaths he was taking. Wrath's eyes were almost literally burning. They didn't leave Damien's figure even as Tianyang spoke to him and restrained him. With every ounce of his strength, he pushed against those pocket spaces and attempted to gain ground on Tianyang. Tianyang sighed in frustration. Wrath's rational mind was already gone. Conversing with him was impossible. But at the same time, Tianyang no longer had the freedom to move against Wrath and kill him. There were two reasons for this. Firstly, Wrath's insistence on killing Damien was too fierce. If Tianyang diverted his attention to attack, Wrath could just as easily use that time to pierce through Damien's neck, which was the worst possible outcome. Secondly, Wrath still had the final option of detonating his life force and mana. If he did this, not just Damien but almost everyone else in this world would perish in an instant. Tianyang absolutely couldn't push Wrath to the point where he'd consider this option. The only thing he could do was defend and make sure Damien didn't die. Luckily, Wrath was already heavily injured and he'd used up a great deal of mana. In terms of attrition, Tianyang had a major advantage. If so, the only thing he could do was wait. When Wrath's strength decreased appropriately, he could take the opportunity to attack and save Damien. As for Damien, who was stuck playing this waiting game with Tianyang, he could only hollowly laugh at his situation. This was the second time Tianyang had saved him from Wrath's murder attempts. Even compared to the last time, this one was far direr. Damien's strength wasn't near his full potential, and with void mana currently hindering him more than it helped, he didn't even have the ability to put up a weak defense against someone like Wrath. He only had his mortal body. This feeling of being forced to rely on outside help was extremely irking to Damien, but if it was Tianyang, he could somewhat cope with it. To this master of his, he only felt gratitude and closeness. Owing Tianyang a favor or two wasn't a problem at all, even if that favor was a life-saving grace. After all, this wasn't the first or second time Tianyang had saved him. He'd saved Damien from Shui Yabai, many assassins sent by the Eclipsing Shadow Sect, and even from himself. If it wasn't for Tianyang's existence and guidance when Damien first arrived on the Cloud Plane, he really would have wandered with no goal or idea of how to proceed forward. Even his emotional trauma would have never been solved without Tianyang's initiation. Hell, in the previous moment, Tianyang had even sacrificed his own blood vitality for Damien's sake. Therefore, in this situation where his life and death wholly depended on Tianyang, Damien was calmer than ever before. If he died here, it would only be his own fault for not being prudent enough, attracting the greed of a demigod. This was the amount of trust he had in his master. Within the authority, only 3 were present. Those in the outside world hadn't even had time to react to the sudden change. In their eyes, Damien had merely vanished into thin air. But even while being alarmed at this change, the Allied force could only continue fighting. Their only chance at salvation was to win this war. Otherwise, death would be the tamest fate for them. In the central area where Damien previously was, the death rates were by far the lowest. While in other areas even 4th classes died like flies, it was different here, because this was where all the experts congregated. Among the crowd, the White Dragon King, Elvira, Lucius, Xianxia, and the Phoenix Matriarch stood out the most. It wasn't just a matter of power, but also skill and cohesiveness. Aside from Xianxia, the rest had spent many years together and were incredibly familiar. Xianxia herself was also incredibly adaptable and had amazing battle sense, making it relatively easy for her to understand and merge into their dynamic. The White Dragon King utilized light while Lucius utilized darkness. When these 2 forces combined, they created a chaotic destructive force that could raise massive amounts of land with ease. The Fire and Ice Phoenix Matriarchs also had similarly dichotomous abilities, combining fire and ice to create a sturdy defense and offense that couldn't be penetrated. This only left Xianxia and Elvira. While Xianxia was a wood and life law practitioner, Xianxia could use spirit laws, which were also a powerful and esoteric form of natural laws. Their combination was more additive than the other 2 groups, but their power didn't fall behind at all. Together, this group cleaved their way through the battlefield. It came to a point where the surrounding enemies became too fearful of them to even move lest they become the next target. But at this moment, the cohesion they maintained was abruptly broken. This? Everyone dodge! The White Dragon King roared with everything he had. His body morphed into a massive dragon body over 1,000 kilometers long. In his claws, he rapidly grabbed Xianxia, Elvira, and Lucius and pushed his mana to exit the chaotic battlefield as fast as he could. And seeing his actions, the 2 Phoenix Matriarchs also rapidly entered their beast forms and fled with him. Their actions were instantaneous and extremely confusing to many. A large majority of them even thought the group ran out of energy and was fleeing in fear. But a small portion of people like Zhang Hualing, who had keen perception and ability to read people, didn't hesitate to follow their actions. These helpers called by Damien were fierce, far fiercer than a majority of the Cloud Plains forces. There was no way they'd act without reason. In that moment, a mere second after the White Dragon King's group and the Hidden Dragon group escaped the central area, the earth burst apart. It wasn't a small explosion at all. It was an explosion that enveloped the entire central area, swallowing all those remaining there within. Suddenly, something shot out from the ground. This object was almost as thick as the massive hole that was created in the earth and shaped like a vine. The only difference being its pinkish and disgusting appearance. It almost looked like an internal organ more than a natural construct. This fleshy vine burst through the central area. Everywhere it passed, 4th classes would burst into blood mist and be absorbed into the vine. But its target wasn't this battlefield at all. It raced into the sky, shattering a hidden dimension that none present could sense with ease. For a millisecond, the scene of Wrath clutching Damien's neck while being imprisoned by Tianyang was revealed to the world. And in the next millisecond, that vine wrapped around Wrath and crushed his body into a paste, devouring him whole. Everything went silent. Whatever had just burst forth from the ground was a calamity of untold proportions. The strange fleshy vine receded into the ground immediately after swallowing Wrath. Tianyang acted without hesitation. Under the combined effect of his burnt blood vitality and extreme law comprehension, he enveloped Damien and every nearby Cloud Plane soldier in his mana and teleported them away from the central area. But even after reaching the outskirts, his frown didn't lessen. The rumbling of the earth only became fiercer, the hole created by the fleshy vine expanding into a sinkhole and swallowing more and more of the ground below. Damien stared into the sinkhole with trepidation. He could feel it. Below that area there was a terrifying aura, the aura of something that was closely related to his own. "We need to leave," he muttered. "We need to get off this world immediately." It was an instinctual feeling that couldn't be explained with words, but after hearing it, Xianxia's expression became dignified. He'd known for a very long time that Damien's body hid a massive secret. Now that Wrath had clearly delineated that he was the seed, Xianxia was somewhat aware of this secret's origin. Damien's instincts weren't the same as a normal person's. A practitioner's instinct was already an ethereal sixth sense that was usually never wrong, but for Damien this was even more exaggerated. Could be seen from the current circumstance. He could feel something inexplicable that even Xianxia, with his insane strength, couldn't sense at all. Without hesitation, Xianxia spread his awareness and forcefully took hold of space. It was just a shame that his burning blood vitality couldn't last much longer. Transporting such a massive swathe of people into the starry sky and protecting them from the chaotic space wasn't something he could do. At that moment, Damien's body began shining with greenish-white light. He already had a rough understanding of the situation after sensing Xianxia's obviously chaotic aura, and healing his blood vitality was one of the first tests he did when he first received Heal from Alaric. His power level wasn't anywhere near enough to help with the transportation process. He could only assist Xianxia as much as he could. His hands landed on his master's back, his mana flowing freely through Xianxia's meridians. With Void Mana's all-encompassing properties and Damien's thorough understanding of how meridians functioned, this process was even more efficient than usual. Xianxia gave Damien a deep look, but didn't say anything more. His mana flared out, dyed with black and white from the various effects Damien was providing him. People began disappearing from the battlefield in droves. However, these were only the Cloud Plains forces. If you can, help Shadow Garden as well. If it wasn't for them, things wouldn't have proceeded so easily on this mission. Damien was aware of the grace Lyn had shown him. Even if he had already paid her back by initiating this chaotic war that essentially collapsed Niflheim and Asgard's fighting strength, even causing Wrath's death, he still held some goodwill towards her and Albius. He wouldn't let them die here. Xianxia nodded simply. With Damien's help, he could almost endlessly burn his blood vitality. Although this state wouldn't last long, it was more than enough time. As the two continued arduously working to transport all their allies from the unnamed world, the sinkhole in the ground continued to expand as well. In but a few seconds, the entirety of the battlefield was caved in. Droves of people fell into the hole. Even if they could fly in usual times, the strange and powerful attractive force coming from within disallowed them from doing so, forcing them to helplessly plummet to their deaths. Only those who were locked on by Xianxia's mana were able to survive this catastrophe. Damien's body shivered. He'd seen plenty of cataclysms in Alaric's memories, but this was the first he'd seen in person. Even in the 3,000 Beast Mountain range, he'd only seen the aftermath. This isn't good. Our forces won't be able to survive with the current rescue speed. If the battle, Damien's thoughts halted. His face paled. Right, why was he only thinking about the battlefield? Aside from those here, the Sun and Moon squadrons, including by Sharon, were still fighting their own battle in Asgard. Xianxia seemed to realize the same thing long ago, but the ugly complexion of his face clearly showed his powerlessness. Even he was locked down by the powerful gravity inside the sinkhole. How could he possibly think about saving those that were far away? When Damien was in the 3,000 Beast Mountain range, he'd burnt his blood vitality to transport millions into the sanctuary. But that was an extremely different circumstance. For one, Damien shared an intrinsic connection with the sanctuary, making transporting living beings into it far easier. Secondly, those individuals were mostly mortals. The cost of forcefully pulling someone was exponentially greater the higher their power level was. In any normal situation, Tianyang's demigod-level strength could easily teleport these thousands of third- and fourth-class beings. But this wasn't any normal situation. Tianyang wasn't just teleporting these people under the intense pressure of the sinkhole's gravity. He was teleporting them almost 100,000 kilometers away into the starry sky. And to make matters worse, he had to set up a layer of protection to keep them from being ripped apart by the chaotic spatial essence present there until he arrived to personally do the same. To say Tianyang was exerting his capabilities to the extreme was an understatement. Damien's eyes hardened. If he could warp, just like Tianyang only moments before, Damien began furiously burning his blood vitality. Warp was a strange skill. It was teleportation, but it worked with far more ease than usual teleportation. Damien didn't have to consciously move through the spatial layers. He only needed to understand his destination, and a portal would form connecting him to it. As long as he could force that portal's formation, even if he didn't move, he'd still be teleported. "Can you handle this without me?" he asked solemnly. He knew it was a stupid question to ask to someone so much more powerful than him, but Tianyang had burnt so much blood vitality in the past few minutes, his fatigue was obvious. Still, Tianyang merely nodded his head. "Go. I'll meet you in the starry sky. Don't worry about your wives and friends. I'll make sure nothing happens to them even if I die while doing so." Damien looked deeply at Tianyang. This master of his really liked making him owe favors. Slowly, a portal formed around Damien's body. At this point, 30% of his blood vitality had been burnt. For him to be able to rapidly recover to perfect fighting form, he could only spend double that amount at most. By the time 50% of his blood vitality was burnt and the portal finished forming, the sinkhole had expanded for tens of thousands of kilometers. It wouldn't be too long before it enveloped the entire world. Faintly, a large black shadow could be seen within. It was a blackness darker than black, creating a terrifying imagery. And that was the last thing Damien saw as he vanished from the battlefield. Unfortunately, he'd never personally been to Asgard's headquarters, so he was forced to warp to Niflheim. Regardless, he knew the approximate location. It only took 30 seconds to reach by teleporting like a madman with the boost of his burnt blood vitality. Damien's awareness spread as far as it could. He identified by Sharon's aura immediately. Looking at the expression on her face, she was already aware that something major was about to occur. "Come with me. We have roughly a minute, so guide me to every subordinate you sense unless you're okay with their deaths." Sharon nodded without hesitation. Even if she didn't have Damien's intuition, she was a powerful practitioner in her own right. She understood that for Damien to be speaking to her so demandingly, the situation was extremely serious. Following Damien's order, she joined him and pointed him towards the Moon Squadron members nearby. By the time the roughly 500 people were gathered together, the gravitational pull from the sinkhole could already be faintly felt. "And the Sun Squadron?" Sharon shook her head. "Don't worry about them. Those cowards are relaxing in an underground prison right now." "Relaxing?" Senior drunken old immortal already freed them. "They are staying of their own volition." "I see." Their conversation was succinct, but even then, it took time. Damien had no choice but to wrap the 500 present in his mana and rapidly activate warp, transporting them to the starry sky. At the same time, boom! The world could no longer handle the pressure of the sinkhole. The earth was sundered, the atmosphere torn to shreds. The world was truly being destroyed. When Damien's body resurfaced in the starry sky, he immediately locked space around him and formed a dimensional cage to isolate his party from the chaotic spatial essence around them. While his first thought was to find Tianyang's group and do the same to lighten his burden, Damien's steps halted almost the second he tried to do so. Look!" A member of the Moon Squadron pointed to the unnamed world, his voice shaking fiercely. As Damien turned his attention, he witnessed a scene unlike any other. The world was crumbling. The atmosphere collapsed, the world's gravity collapsing along with it. The foundational laws that allowed it to remain sturdy for an unknown amount of time were no longer there to provide support. Massive chunks of debris spanning the length of several cities flew into the void wantonly. The human architecture present on the surface was sundered into oblivion. At the same time, countless lives were taken. Their screams formed a crescendo that made Damien feel like he could hear their sorrow from hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. Seeing the massive chunks of human meat that floated through the void along with the debris, he was utterly dumbfounded. He couldn't believe that such a tragedy appeared out of nowhere, completely unprovoked. But he couldn't stay still. He had to at least keep the people that were saved alive. His awareness spread. Starlight rained down on him from the surrounding space, enhancing his perception. In the starry sky, Damien was at his extreme peak. Luckily, it wasn't hard to find Tianyang's group. They were quite conspicuous. Spatial mana raged. In the next moment, Damien's group arrived on flat ground in the midst of a massive city filled with people. The scene was chaotic as the existing denizens attempted to sort their new comrades into various shelters. The surface didn't have nearly enough space to accommodate them all. This city was none other than Avalon. "Lin, you fucking genius," Damien muttered under his breath. Logically speaking, the next step after building a floating city was obviously to give it the capability for interspatial travel. But this wasn't an easy thing to implement at all. For Avalon to have such fierce barriers and abilities, it was clear that Lin had been planning to explore the vastness of the starry sky far before this calamity appeared. Only, she probably didn't expect its first test flight to be due to the unnamed world's destruction. Still, there was no time to rest. After Damien dropped off his baggage, he first used his soul connection with Ryue to locate her. After affirming that she and Rose were present in Avalon, he directly left the city's barrier. The scene of the unnamed world's destruction became clear to him again. He teleported. He teleported as far away from Avalon as he could possibly get. He had a faint premonition that the destruction of a world was impossible for him to describe. He couldn't possibly put the scene he saw into words, or even fully comprehend it in his mind. While he watched on, boom! A change took place. So far, it was only the world's outer layer that was collapsing. While it was a terrifying scene, it was still only the start of its destruction. But at that moment, a portion of the world thousands of kilometers in diameter exploded in a pillar of magma and debris. Faintly within the flames, the visage of a claw could be seen. That is, Damien unknowingly stuttered. The appendage he saw alone was enough to crush the 3,000 beast mountain range with a tap. Yet that was only the first. Boom! Another claw ripped apart the world. It was clear that the being they were attached to didn't want to wait for the world to finish its slow collapse. The various layers of the planet cracked and shattered, spouts of magma painting the starry sky red. At some unknown time, Tianyang, the drunken old immortal Albius, and the other allied demigods had appeared beside Damien. This group watched solemnly as that being revealed itself. If they had one thing to be thankful for, it was that this being's massive size made its movements incredibly slow. This was the only reason they were able to escape with everyone they needed to save in time to avoid catastrophic losses. And at the same time, Tianyang and the drunken old immortal had used their own methods to call reinforcements. The speed of a demigod couldn't be underestimated. To traverse the distance between the cloud plane and the unnamed world at their fastest speed, they only needed a few minutes. And aside from their reinforcements, multiple unknown demigods appeared as well. Sharon had long since told Damien that there were other forces aiding in the operation aside from the cloud plane. These forces were from the other major worlds of the human domain. The demigod ancestors they brought also congregated with the group. Even during the chaotic battle they hadn't appeared, taking a back seat since the conflict didn't involve them at all. But this time they had no choice but to join the fight. They couldn't escape after all. This being exerted a pressure that even made these demigods break into cold sweats. It was clearly at the peak of the demigod realm at the very least. It might even be, regardless, it was a calamity for the human domain as a whole. If they couldn't defeat it here, then how would they defend against it when it came to their home worlds, where they had nowhere near the same amount of demigods to aid them? Besides, even if this being was slow with its precision movements, There was no doubt that each of its steps would allow it to traverse a distance they couldn't even imagine. Fleeing was pointless. As two wings large enough to encase the entire world within their span broke free from the earth, they were even more certain of this fact. Vomum! A heaven-shaking fluctuation spread through the unnamed world and the chaotic space surrounding it. With its movement, the collapse of the world became instantaneous. Extremely massive pieces of debris flew into the starry sky with momentum that could flatten a fourth class with ease. Within the chaos, the hazy outline of that terrifying being was finally revealed. Its head was elephantine with a far-reaching trunk and tusks larger than any building that previously stood on the world's surface, but it was covered in harrowing draconic scales. It had the body and bat-like wings of a dragon, its four legs powerful and clawed like a tiger. As if acting as a cherry on top, its tail was like a scorpion's stinger, ready to lash out and kill anyone it touched in an instant. Space flowed around this beast like a river, showing extreme familiarity with its presence. It was only when they saw this that Damien's group finally understood this being's race. It was a space beast, born from the chaotic space and spending their lives within it. Space beasts were terrifying creatures with untold power. If one was lucky enough to catch them while they were young, killing them wouldn't be a problem. But if they were allowed to grow, ooh! The beast raised its head, letting out a bellow that shook the universe at its foundation. Finally, it was able to wake up. Finally, the moment it had been waiting for arrived. Finally, it could sense that irresistible aura that it had only felt once before. The beast's eyes opened. They were like miniature moons of their own. Its pupils were blurred at first, but quickly cleared as they adjusted. And then, its gaze locked on Damien. "So it is you," an ancient, billowing voice transmitted from the beast, causing space to quake at its ferocity. The beast didn't open its mouth, nor did it use a mental transmission. Its thoughts had been directly imposed onto and manifested into reality. This was a level of fusion with the universe that none present had come close to reaching. This discovery immediately caused those demigods' eyes to harden. Whether or not the group of them could win this battle was completely unknown. Frankly, they weren't too hopeful of their chances. Damien was different from them. While these demigods were so focused on the ramifications behind the voice, Damien's mind was shaken by the words themselves. This beast was staring at him. He could feel its terrifying gaze, its deathly aura that surrounded his body. "You who carry his scent, I have been awaiting your arrival for eons." The beast spoke once more. As its body finished unraveling to its full length, a shining blue object was revealed. Damien's eyes widened. This was a world core, there was no doubt about it. Suddenly, Damien began to understand why the world remained unnamed despite the history it had. Because it was never truly a world in the first place. The space beast's words were few, but they carried monstrous intent. It was like Damien was being told the secrets of the universe in those few words alone. He understood. He didn't know how long the space beast had been alive, but it couldn't have been a short time. At some point, it had found out about the fact that Damien would be born into the human domain. After that, it found a world at the start of its formation and took it as its nest, laying in slumber until an entire world formed around its body. To call this beast massive was an understatement. Even compared to some smaller worlds like Earth, it was much bigger. The inheritance of the God of Heaven. 500,000 years of waiting. It will finally be mine. The beast's eyes flashed. Without warning, its massive tail shot out like a meteor. "Dodge!" Tianyang roared. In that instant, the demigods scattered. But compared to its size, the tail was incredibly fast. With the distance between the group and the beast being over 100,000 kilometers, it was able to show off its capabilities perfectly. Boom! Space ruptured everywhere the stinger passed. In what felt like only a few seconds, the massive visage of the tail was already at the group's previous location. Bang! The stinger pierced through space, creating a cavity that stretched for tens of thousands of kilometers into the distance. "Get information! Surround it! Cut off its tail first!" Tianyang's voice roared through space. Immediately, the remaining demigods complied with his command. With the forces of the human domain's main worlds and Shadow Garden combined, the total number of demigods had reached 12. They rushed in without hesitation. Against a beast of this size, that was their best option. Besides, aiming for the tail wasn't a random decision. Tianyang's battle sense far surpassed Damien's. In that instant the tail was used to attack, he'd deduced many things. For instance, while the tail was certainly powerful, its power mainly relied on penetrative force. Its movements themselves needed time to gain enough momentum to become heaven-shaking. Otherwise, the beast would have used its tail to directly pierce through the world and destroy it instantly instead of waiting for the opportune moment to burst it apart. Compared to the raw brute strength of its legs, the tail was a far safer attack target. 12 demigods used various methods to speed in close to where the beast was, but when they arrived within 10,000 kilometers of it, they found their movements becoming strange. Tianyang frowned. Right, a space beast was the closest existence to an embodiment of space itself. Even if it didn't personally move, space would instinctively protect it like a living thing. For these demigods, facing it would be incredibly difficult. Tianyang gritted his teeth and charged forward, galvanizing his own space laws to carve a path forward. His speed increased rapidly, his wake being left a clear path for others to follow. The remaining demigods instantly understood his intent. However, it was an unrealistic dream. The tunnel Tianyang created began rapidly closing in an instant, repairing itself to peak condition. Suddenly, a figure appeared within the tunnel. His arms spread out like an eagle, pitch-black mana flaring from his body. With his presence, the bent space stabilized once more. "Go! Don't hesitate!" Damien roared. He didn't care if he was talking to people far more powerful than him anymore. Keeping this tunnel open for a few seconds was the limit of his current capabilities. To a demigod, however, a few seconds was more than enough time. Damien only felt gusts of spatial essence whip around his body as the speed of those demigods caused it to chaotically stir. He teleported away right after. This fight wasn't something he could interfere in. He could only watch from the side. These demigods, aside from the ones who personally knew Damien, didn't even know that they were fighting to protect him. It was his fault that this space beast appeared in the first place. He already knew that space and time were intrinsically connected. For a space beast to divine his future existence wasn't too strange given this one's power. The only thing Damien was confused about was the so-called God of Heaven. On Damien's body, only the void physique held the qualifications to entice a character like this beast. But what connection did it have to this God of Heaven? Damien was extremely curious. He felt that he found another avenue to learn the secrets of his physique, the other one being the Nox. But that was only if he could survive through this incident. If those demigods couldn't last, he shook his head and returned his attention to the fight. Not even a few seconds had passed, but the demigods already arrived close to the beast. At this time, it finally acknowledged their presence. Minor creations attack me, the envoy of God. Unacceptable. A terrific pressure spread from its body, forcefully increasing the intensity of the surrounding force field. At the same time, its tail whipped out once more. "Blood Emperor! Get out of the way!" The drunken old immortal yelled. The Blood Emperor, the demigod from Bloodland, rapidly revolved his mana without hesitation, turning his mortal body into a sea of blood that rapidly waded through space and escaped. But even then, he wasn't able to completely avoid the massive stinger. As it struck out and collapsed the surrounding space, a fourth of the blood sea was exiled to the void. When the Blood Emperor coagulated into physical form again, his face was pale and his aura shaky. He'd been seriously wounded in a single hit. Nobody pitied his state, though. The remaining 11 demigods used the opportunity created by the attack to rush at the tail, barraging it with various flashes of laws. Boom! 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 Explosions rang out constantly and impacted the tail with fierce momentum that caused frightening fluctuations to spread out. But compared to the size of the beast, their attacks looked small. This wasn't their fault at all. If they were able to show their full capabilities, even with this beast's tough body, it wouldn't be able to resist their attacks. After all, the beast wasn't a true god yet. It was only at the peak of demigod realm, the only fact making survival a viable outcome. The problem lay in the fact that they were heavily suppressed under the beast's force field. Only Tianyong could show something similar to his full strength. But he chose not to. Seeing that the attacks weren't having their intended effects, Tianyong drew back and spread his mana. His hands flitted through the air, drawing up 11 runic symbols that then shot into the bodies of the surrounding demigods. The pressure on them instantly lessened. Tianyong was clearly using his power to support them instead of attacking. Petty tricks. The beast scoffed with disdain. This was his domain. Nobody but him could rule this space. Space began to contort once again, causing the demigods' complexions to turn ugly. The battle had only started, yet they were at such a severe disadvantage. Was this truly a fight they could win? In that moment of doubt, there was a change. Tianyong primed his fist and punched out, his body erupting with strength. In the next instant, boom! Hundreds of the space beast's scales were blown apart. A fountain of blood sprayed. While this impact was only around the size of a human and didn't do any significant damage, it was a sign that the demigods truly did have the capabilities to harm this beast. Aside from that, it was clear that the space beast didn't see them as a threat. Even now, it hadn't moved from its original position, its body floating above the unnamed world's world core. If these demigods could take advantage of this, now! Tianyong shouted. They moved together as one. Tianyong burst apart the space around him, the others following close behind. In an instant, they reached the beast's back. It was like a large island floating in the void. Even when they landed on its back, the space beast showed no signs of moving. They were like ants compared to it, truly. But they didn't come to appreciate the scenery. As soon as they landed, the 12 of them began attacking together. Albius raised a massive axe into the sky and cleaved down heavily. His muscles bulged under his weapon's weight, mana fiercely swirling around its edge. Boom! The attack landed, shattering apart a few hundred scales. The others did the same. Every single one of them was an expert in their laws. Their attacks weren't jokes at all. Behind them, drunken old immortal had a sea of reddish-brown water around him. He allowed it to seep into the wounds that others created, corroding the beast's exposed skin. Still, they faced the same problem. The beast was large enough to generate its own gravity, and this gravity was being used to suppress them. This was the beast's way of asserting dominance. Merge your authorities. Isolate it from the surrounding space. A mental transmission entered their heads. When they heard it, they felt like idiots. Right, they were facing a space beast. Its strongest strength was its connection to space itself. If they could isolate it, they'd be able to defeat it far easier. The demigods acted immediately, superimposing their authorities along the beast's back. Over 100,000 kilometers of space became a separate dimension. A large majority of the beast's back was included in this space. Damien sighed in relief as he watched this. He was the one who sent the mental transmission. After his baptism, he became much clearer on how space worked, and his connection with it had deepened even further. Aside from that, the specific branch of space that dimensional magic introduced him to made him far more familiar with the concept of force fields. Seeing the beast use the surrounding space to suppress those demigods, it didn't take long for him to realize that he could solve that problem with his dimensional cage ability. Only he wasn't nearly strong enough to do so. It was only after he remembered his experience with Wrath and Tianyong, where he personally experienced an authority, that a light bulb went off in his head. Now, with the help of his advice, the demigods were freed from a majority of the beast's pressure. A rain of light shines brighter than any star as the demigods combined their strength to attack. Boom! Finally, a large chunk of the beast's flesh was dislodged. After the drunken old immortal used his strange corrosive liquid to fill the space, they moved on. After all, they couldn't cause substantial damage at the moment. If they alerted the beast and gained its true attention, they'd lose any opportunity they had. For now, they were stalling time. Within a few minutes, reinforcements would arrive. Only then would they begin their true assault. A few minutes could pass by rapidly or incredibly slowly depending on the circumstance. In this case, it was the latter. After what felt like an eternity of slowly chipping away at the beast while it remained still, many flashes of light began to arrive from the distance. These demigods already understood the situation. Nothing needed to be said. The second they appeared, they attacked. Feeling the approaching auras, the beast opened the eyes it had closed in the time they were waiting. Finally, all have come? Its words sent shivers down the spines of all present. Without warning, the beast's massive wings flapped. Boom! Space was torn apart. The beast traveled several hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, turning around to face its opponents before halting and drifting in the void. Altogether, appropriate sustenance. Before reclamation, its mouth opened wide. From within, a large black ball shot out. Everywhere it went, space twisted around it and light was entrapped within. This object was a miniature black hole. The true fight began. The number of demigods had doubled. Facing the incoming black hole, most decided to rush around it. Even though its suction force was strong, they were just as strong. Instead of a detriment, it acted as a benefit. The demigods used this force to boomerang themselves around the black hole and build momentum to shoot out towards the beast. 24 shooting stars sundered space together, surrounding the beasts. As if they'd planned it before, they stood with equal distance between each other, caging the beast within the circle their bodies created. God ensnaring formation. Activate. God killing array. Activate. The 12 demigods activating the formation turned into shining pillars of light. A complex grand array formed in the space between them, blocking it off from the outside world. At the same time, a second array formed, manifesting as blood-red energy that floated in the sealed space like fog. If one peered into it, they'd faintly be able to see the formation of titanic god-killing weapons. But the god-killing array couldn't be activated immediately. In the time it took for these weapons to form, the remaining 12 demigods acted as a buffer. Their bodies shot through the air and rapidly impacted the massive beast, seas of different law comprehensions decorating the space in a myriad of colors. It was a fierce counterattack that went almost too smoothly, but the reason for this wasn't majestic at all. These two formations were human inheritances found within the human domain. The ancient powerhouses from 100,000 years ago left them behind for their descendants, but unfortunately, they weren't able to tell their stories. The human domain's forces found these formations during the previous war. Their existence was a major part of the reason why the human domain was able to attain incredible feats during that war, essentially giving themselves an extra layer of protection for its inevitable continuation. Now, these demigods were putting them into action once again. This wasn't their first or second time doing so. They'd fought side by side countless times in their tens of thousands of years of existence. Under the god ensnaring formation, the beast's movements were largely limited. And with space sealed off, it wasn't nearly as powerful as it used to be. But that didn't mean it was powerless. Frightening fluctuations of mana spread from the beast's body. Its front leg raised, tearing through the starry sky. Cook! A demigod from Ataraxia coughed blood as he was sent flying away. At that moment, 3 others flew forward and attacked the outstretched leg madly. Tianyang circled around the beast, appearing beside its tail once again and continuing to attack it. From the way things looked from an outside perspective, the demigods had a clear upper hand. Unfortunately, space beasts were far more fearsome than what this one had shown so far. After all, it had been too lazy to enter a more comfortable fighting form. But now, seeing how it had to face a crowd of powerful enemies and needed the ability to maneuver around them, it no longer continued treating them like insects. Its goal was never them in the first place. Its goal was the child they were protecting. But if he wanted to take back what was rightfully his from that child, he would first need to kill those that blocked his path. The space beast's body compressed rapidly. After all, it was also a being under the system, and it conformed to its rules. As a beast, regardless of whether or not it was from an ancient race, it had the ability to attain human form at 4th class. With a flash of light, the massive bestial chimera disappeared from sight, replaced by a naked, handsome youth. His eyes scanned those around him placidly. His mouth opened, letting out a deep and rumbling voice that didn't match his appearance. I am the fifth primal sovereign. Humans who block my path, be honored to die by my hands.